Hey, thanks for coming back. You're with us for another minute of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we talk about the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed movie, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd, coming to you from the great city of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, home of the Experimental Aircraft Association.
And we are talking about minute 2. We're in the second minute of The Rocketeer, where we've been watching them push an aircraft through a hangar door, and while James Horner pulls out the clarinets and starts up his beautiful theme to the Rocketeer. The problem with watching this movie 1 minute at a time is that you just want to keep going because you're hearing the James Horner music, and you just want to finish the whole suite.
Yeah, it's absolutely criminal to chop that piece of music up.
It is stunning, and I know it's on a frequent play on my iPhone when I'm driving in the car. It's also very dangerous when the pace starts picking up because I have to stay in my lane, stay in traffic.
You start pulling back on the steering wheel, hoping you can fly.
Where's my throttle?
Right.
We're still watching some of the title cards going by of different characters as the blurred image of the GB is being rolled through the hangar there on Friday morning in October of 1938. The next character that comes up, and I think we just have to have a moment pause, take a deep breath, and say Jennifer Connelly.
And behave like mature adults.
Yes.
Because as far as anybody listening knows, we might be mature adults.
Yes. It's
no.
Let's talk about the wonderful actress, Jennifer Connelly. Gosh, all of her life, I think she's been up on the movie screen, and everybody's been pretty amazed that she's very compelling. You don't see her and say, well, I mean, I guess maybe nowadays you say that's Jennifer. When you see her, you believe the part that she's in. In this movie, she's the damsel in distress. Although she doesn't really take that role too seriously as being in distress. She
definitely holds her own. She's got her own plans and her own ideas.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the few people that's defeated James Bond. So, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, Jennifer Connelly's had an excellent career. This was one of her first grown-up roles. I think it's the most grown-up. She'd the previous year she'd been in the movie Career Opportunities, a comedy, but up until then she was mostly a kid. She was, I think, most famously known, where everybody kind of remembers her from, back in 1991, she'd be the main character in Labyrinth.
Yep. That was 1982, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, and she was just a kid at the time, up against David Bowie, the evil David Bowie, for taking her brother away. She's a stunning woman, and looks. She was on Glamour magazine in 17 and all these other things. It goes far beyond her looks. Her acting ability, her chops here, her ability to sell the story, no matter how ridiculous it is, she really helped this movie become believable. She seemed to be a struggling actress, and we'll find out more about her as these minutes go by. But again, another great piece of casting. She's in this movie to replace the graphic novel's girlfriend, who was Betty Page, and we will be talking about, just in 2 more episodes, we'll talk a little bit more about Betty Page, the original girlfriend of Cliff Secord for this movie. But she did a great job, made this whole movie family friendly, yet still sexy and charming. So anyway, let's save Jennifer Connelly for later.
As if that were possible.
Yeah, and as she fades off the screen, we see a tail wheel go by of the GB, that a symptom or a kind of a signature of the era, that tail dragger planes, which kind of also sets the tone for what year this is and where we are at the confluence of a bunch of different changes in aviation.
Right, and I think we're going to be talking about the GB quite a bit, sort of through this section, and then of course in much later episodes. No spoilers, of course. But, it's interesting to point out that this airplane was, at least in the early 30s, you have to be honest and say it is a little bit dated to see it here in 1938. This is a GB Model Z, GB for the Granville brothers we mentioned in yesterday's episode. It was built strictly for racing, and, racing was a big deal in this era. And I know we talk a little bit, I think we'll plan on talking a little bit more about some of the air racing and stuff in a couple of later episodes, especially when we see some of the local sort of pylon racing that's happening. But the thing you want to put in your head is that at the time this airplane was introduced, it was the fastest thing out there. It was faster than anything that the Army had at the time. The Army was lagging way behind what civilian designers like the Granville brothers were up to.
They were still using biplanes to an extent, weren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. They still were using like the Boeing F4B4 and things like that all along through a lot of the 30s, certainly late 20s and through the 30s. And you talk about the tail wheel. We don't want to beat that into the ground, and you get a good example of what makes that challenging in maybe right at the end of this minute or the beginning of the next, when you see some taxiing and starting to take off. You can't see anything straight ahead in a tailwheel airplane, especially one like this. Some you can, but the GB, the visibility is terrible. You sit way at the back and all these sorts of things. So something else sort of indicative, as you said, indicative of the era. Very, very quickly, actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about Paul Sorvino, and then I'll talk about numbers and letters. How's that?
Okay, I do have a question on the tail. The when they switched to the tripods of the future, where planes were straight and level taking off,
which sounds like a science fiction movie all on its own. Like was it John Christopher, the tripods? Yes. Anyway,
is it a matter of that was what they were familiar with doing, is taking off with keeping your wings tilted upwards so that you kind of caught that ground effect, or was it? I mean,
that's part of it. Having the smaller wheel in the back, it was in certain circumstances, it does sort of, in a small way, preset the airplane into the right attitude for taking off and climbing. Although a lot of times you'll notice the first thing you do in a tailwheel airplane as you're rolling is you lift the tail up off the ground, so now you're perfectly level, and then you transition into that climb attitude. But it does tend to start generating lift a little bit sooner, and it's for any pilots out there or aspiring pilots out there, maybe you'd agree with me that it's far more challenging than flying a nose wheel airplane, partly because of where the center of gravity is and where you are. A tailwheel airplane is kind of like pushing a shopping cart backwards through a grocery store. It always wants to spin around. Tailwheel airplane always wants to do that too. That tail is constantly fighting to get around in front of the airplane, which is exactly what you don't want. So if you ask, why do you bother? It's the closest analogy I've ever come up with is why do some of us like driving a car with a manual transmission? On paper, everything about an automatic is easier and maybe arguably better, but there's something just much more enjoyable. You're much more connected to the experience. It's just a much more interesting and rewarding experience to operate a vehicle, in this case a nice tailwheel airplane, that needs that extra level of finesse.
Okay, this is just for my benefit because I don't know if anybody would actually care except me.
It's all about you, Jim. This is the Jim O'Kane Minute, ladies and gentlemen.
Hal's here is my library computer, but I just
I'm sorry, Jim. I'm afraid I can't do that.
When you are rolling down the runway, and I know there's different velocities, like
right.
V1 where you can't stop, you got to keep going and take
sure.
off, and then there's V rotate where you have to pull it up into the sky. Is there a V where you have to get the tail wheel up off the ground? Is that a thing?
It's not necessarily called out as a specific speed, but what you do find though is there can be a transition point in a tailwheel airplane that you have to be very, very careful of. So as long as that third wheel, the tail wheel, is on the ground, then you're using that wheel to some extent to provide steering. As soon as it is off the ground, you're using just the rudder to provide your steering. So there's got to be enough airflow over the rudder to make it effective. So there can be a speed where you're just fast enough where that tail starts to get light and fly, so you lose the steering from the wheel, but it's not fast enough for the rudder to be effective. So whatever direction you happen to be going at that instant is the direction you're going to be going until you accelerate and go faster. So we do a lot of times talk about holding the tail down until we're at a safer speed. And that's not necessarily marked as one of those, V speeds, V this, V that, but it is a speed you do learn pretty quickly in any given airplane. Some airplanes don't really have this issue. Basically, if it's fast enough for the tail to fly, the rudder works great. But in this case, something like the GB, I would presume with all of that thrust coming from that massive engine up front, you probably have pretty good rudder effectiveness all the way through. But but we've got some great resources about this particular airplane that we can dive deeper into, I think maybe in tomorrow's minute, and talk about flying this particular airplane.
Okay, sounds good. Now my brain is full. Thank you.
All right, then. Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Paul Sorvino though before we get out of here. That is a great.
We're not even close to being done with this minute.
I have to say that's one of my favorite shots of the GB. We're getting more visibility there as we're moving further away from the ship. I just love the sky reflected off the skin.
Oh yeah,
as it's being pushed into the sunshine,
and you get such a great look at that blunt, fierce sort of nose high attitude that it has. That all good tail draggers have, and that's probably one of the better examples, actually, of that visibility that you're talking about. You can see where the pilot sits, and how could you possibly see anything straight ahead? And the answer is you really can't. But that's not what this airplane was built for. It was built to go fast.
I would think that you might want to even put like a piece of plexiglass on the floorboards and look between the rudder pedals, maybe, just so that you can see where you're going.
There's a lot of aerobatic airplanes that do that, and that's a little bit more for tracking the ground and maneuvers and things like that. But that's not exactly, it's not unheard of.
Yeah, this of typical of the time of the 30s, there were a lot of guy wires holding monoplanes together. I would think that would be something that would be repaired later as stronger alloys and tougher materials were made for the wings, so that you didn't have to suspend every. It's almost like a suspension bridge. Some of the earlier, when you look at some of the 30s planes, they'll actually have like a tower in the middle of the fuselage that kind of holds the rest of the wings up.
And it's interesting you point that out, because that was much more prevalent with biplanes, but the GB, this particular GB, this Model Z recreation was originally built in 1931, and that was at a time when biplanes were still very prevalent, and so you can still see we're using a lot of the same construction techniques, which is fascinating, because those wires cause an immense amount of drag. So for an airplane that's built for speed, as blunt and pudgy as the GB looks, in fact, just in a couple of seconds you see a nice top-down view of it. It's actually quite streamlined. It's really shaped like a bullet. The wheel pants, the covers of the wheels are very, very streamlined. Everything about it is nice and curved and streamlined. And then, for the sake of structural integrity, though, they had to put these external wires on it. And we have construction techniques, now, and that really came around, really starting in the mid and late 30s, and certainly by the time we got to the 40s, those were really all but things of history, except for specific vintage types and that sort of thing.
It always amazes me that the 30s, it was such a cauldron of things being, so many things were being thrown out and so many things were being put on top of each other. They didn't have time to do it all, so they did some of it in pieces. This is like the only equivalent I can think of modern days, or in our lifetimes, was the VCR DVD combo kits that you. It's like, I want to be able to watch a DVD, but I still want a VCR. Right. So it's a monoplane built in the biplane era, but quite a scene. Well, let's talk a little bit about Paul Sorvino. Paul Sorvino, of course, is everybody's favorite gangster. He's if you want a guy in a black shirt and a white tie, Paul Sorvino is your man. He was born right about in 1939 when this roughly when this film was set. So he grew up in this thing. If you've seen Goodfellas, if you've seen Casino, Paul Sorvino, and he's very good at being very quietly angry, and he does that very well in this movie. I just enjoy seeing him. I remember watching him in a movie on HBO called That Championship Season with Martin Sheen and stuff, and it was an old basketball team that had been getting together every year and talking about when they used to be winners and how they weren't, all their failures since they were in college, and it was a non-gangster role for him, but he became part of that whole wise guy era of the 80s and 90s. I think that's where he hit his stride.
And Goodfellas was 1990, if I remember right. So
yeah,
the summer prior to this, right?
So he just basically carried. They probably told him, that movie you were just in, just keep doing that. Only now it's 1938.
Right. We're just the lapels will be a little different, and dress a little better, put a
Yeah,
carnation in.
yeah. He was in. I don't know if you, not that many people saw Oliver Stone's Nixon, but he played Henry Kissinger. It was. I
Oh,
remember seeing the
wow.
movie, going, "Wow, this is." Well, that whole movie is just horribly miscast, but he did a good try. He really he tries doing what he was.
I'd completely forgotten about that, but I don't know what it is. In Goodfellas, and as we see in to me that persona carries forward so well in this movie. You just you catch yourself thinking, yeah, maybe being a gangster wouldn't be such a bad thing, and could he be my uncle? See, this
Yeah,
you want Paul Sorvino to be part of your family somehow.
yeah, yeah. You just he'd be the guy showing up with the cannolis, and oh
Exactly.
good, Uncle
Yeah.
Paulie's here.
Right. Yeah.
But he just really he's perfect in the role that he does here, and he's kind of he's that guys and dolls kind of guy. He's a bad guy, but he's a good guy too, and maybe we'll get to see a little bit more of the good guy side of him. He could be a savior of this piece. So anyway, the fellows are still pushing that GB outside. We're finally hitting the sunshine. Does it really take? I guess it only takes three. We're seeing four guys pushing this plane as we get to the beautiful overhead shot of the GB,
Right.
and we're gonna know them later as Goose and Skeets, who are holding onto the wings. Let me get this straight. Skeets is the fellow pushing the left wing. Goose is the guy pushing the tail. There's another hanger-on, Malcolm, who works at the airport, and he's an old World War One flyer. And then there's a fourth guy who we don't know who he is. He's kind of constantly in the background. He's never identified in the script, so he's our mystery man. He's you know he could be anybody claiming to be in a movie could say, I was that guy, on the right way.
Fine. Then it was me.
Yeah,
It's I hate to break it to you now, Jim, but that was me.
that was your
I'm
early
also the originator of the Wilhelm scream. A lot of people know that
Okay.
about me, but
Well, I taught James Horner how to go da da dum 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 dum. Uh, so he's pushing that mystery man that's covering the tail number. Which actually, let's talk a little bit at the tail numbers. Why are they all N, and why is it important to have them on a plane?
so simply put, what we would just now call an N number, at least here in the U.S., basically equivalent to a license plate on your car. For all the same reasons. It means it's licensed, it's identifiable, it's unique to that individual vehicle. It's a little unusual in the airplane world. We actually paint them on the airplane, or they go on, with decals or something. It's not a replaceable thing. The N is just the international code for. I've always assumed it was for the N in United States. For whatever reason, when international organizations were getting together and starting to agree, we need some standards and some registrations and assigning country codes. I always assumed we were just a little bit late to the party. So when we showed up, they said you can't have U or A, you can have N. Anyway, that's probably a completely apocryphal story, but
It tells well though.
sure, as far as we can tell, Canada is C, Great Britain is G, Germany, Deutschland is D, that sort of thing. So in the U.S. we have N, and then what we don't have anymore, we did have in the 30s, is that second letter. In this case, it's NR, and then 77V, or as we would now call it 77 Victor, using the phonetic alphabet. The R at that point standard for restricted. So N, it's licensed in the U.S. R means that this is licensed in a restricted category. In this case, this airplane's purpose built for racing, which means, you can't sell rides in it, which of course makes sense because there's only one seat, and that's for the pilot. There's a lot of things you can't do with it, but it's legal to get in it and use it for its specifically designed purpose. It's restricted to that purpose, in this case, racing. 77V is in Victor. Those are just, they're sort of the arbitrary numbers and letters. You can select these to some point, but it's not as customizable. Again, going back to the plate analogy, it's not like a vanity plate in a car. Now, this airplane is a recreation done by a guy named Bill Turner out in California of a real airplane, and it's an exceptionally well done, detailed reproduction of the original GB Model Z racer from 1931. And what's kind of nice in cases like this is they were able to reuse that original number. So the original airplane was in the early 30s, crashed and was destroyed. When he built the replica in the late 70s, he was able to apply to the FAA and get that N number again. So this is not the specific individual airplane that originally wore that number, but it's a recreation of it, and it legally and legitimately has that number.
So the numbers aren't retired, I guess, with the loss of a plane. You can
not necessarily. No, you can sort of apply to have them done. As a quick aside, probably one of the more famous numbers would be NX211, and that was the number on the Spirit of St. Louis. N for the U.S., X for experimental. So on Charles Lindbergh's airplane flying across the Atlantic in 1927, that airplane obviously hangs in the Smithsonian, the National Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian Institution. But at EAA, where I work, we have two of several flyable replicas of it. We were very lucky when we built our second one to go to the FAA and actually get that number reissued. So I've had a chance to fly it, and so that makes me one of not that many people. I mean, certainly in the low few hundreds probably that have NX211 in their logbook besides Lindbergh. So that does not make me does not make me great, but maybe it earns me a drink at a party. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to fly it with looking sideways and things
exactly.
like that.
Now our replicas are set up so we have there's room for a safety pilot in a front seat. Lindbergh had 400 gallons of gas to fly 33 hours. We have a safety pilot who's got small windows, but when I've flown it, you're flying sitting in the back in the Lindbergh seat. You still can't see straight ahead, so you're always peeking out the side and that kind of thing. Anyway,
wow.
So that's Numbers and Letters by Hal.
and over the current Numbers and Letters that we're looking at is the name Terry O'Quinn, who I think Terry O'Quinn, it will forever be associated with Lost. I think John Locke, he's the eternal mystery. Fantastic actor in this movie playing Howard Hughes, and I love watching Terry O'Quinn work. He rides the line between good and evil, and always does it with a smile. He's always very happy when things are when mayhem is all around, and that's how he plays Howard Hughes in this movie.
And I absolutely loved him in Alias as well. I thought he was.
Yes, he was great in Alias, and also, I mean, if you really want creepy, check out the movie The Stepfather, because he is very disturbing in that movie. He's just he has that whole Christopher Walken thing about him that you really like the guy, but if he tapped you on the shoulder, you turned around, you'd kind of give yourself a start.
He feels like a Christopher Walken that you'd be okay taking places. Walken.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could take him anywhere, but Terry O'Quinn, you can bring him out there. But yeah, he always does have that. There's a steely edge under this very, very affable exterior.
Yeah, we were talking about Star Trek yesterday with Bill Campbell, and how he lost Riker to Jonathan Frakes, and whenever I think of Terry O'Quinn, I can't think of anything more besides Locke in Lost. I think of him in that episode of the Pegasus on the Next Generation, where he was Jonathan Frakes' evil admiral, former boss, who was trying to get him to do very unethical things, and he got to play that one with hair. He had a lot more hair in that particular episode. But yeah, very, very enjoyable. And I think if you haven't seen this movie, by the way, you should go see the movie. But when you do see it, I think most people will find Terry O'Quinn to be a fan favorite for playing Howard Hughes.
As we transition out of Terry O'Quinn, one thing very quickly to point out for people who may not be familiar is Terry O'Quinn's name is fading out, and the guys pushing the airplane, the GB out, are turning it, and you can notice that the tail wheel just swivels. It's a castering tail wheel. So and I believe, and I'll dive deeper into this maybe tomorrow's episode, but I believe this is also has a locking tail wheel. But while you're taxiing the airplane, that wheel just sort of swivels like a shopping cart, so you can see it turning, and then you notice. Sorry, who's on the right wing again? With the,
I guess that would be you, Hal.
well, so yeah, of course it's me, right? Oh, that's right, because
That's the guy we don't know. Yeah.
That's that guy we don't know. You just notice it's intriguing to point out everybody. The other two guys are pushing. He's actually pulling to get that airplane to sort of swivel and get it lined up straight. Since there's no other real steering mechanism to it at this point, with nobody in the cockpit.
Yeah, I just keep thinking of the owner of the GB watching these. These are actors and not just doubles, so they probably went very carefully over it with William Sanderson and Don Pugsley and Eddie Jones. Please, whatever you do, don't tug too hard.
One thing I was actually surprised to learn as we started digging into this, that Disney did actually buy this airplane.
Oh.
For the use of the movie, which is pretty unusual, but it's also, kudos to them. It's for making that level of commitment and saying, know what, this is going to be ours. And I didn't realize that, but then when that airplane came here to Oshkosh for our big annual fly-in and convention and air show, it would have been the summer either of 91 or 92. Obviously, the shooting was long since done, but it was actually still owned by Disney, but they had effectively loaned it back to the original owner so that he could bring it out here and display it.
Now, when these are shipped to Oshkosh, are they flown there, or do people actually do cross country with this, or do they just put it in a truck and roll it around?
It really varies. It depends on the person and the pilot and how comfortable they are. And, of course, it depends a lot on weather. You might be surprised, though, how many of these airplanes people will just fly them out. There was another GB replica built just recently. It was an airplane called the QED, which the proportions look very, very similar to this Model Z that we're seeing here. But it is... I'd have to look at the dimensions, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were effectively twice as big. It's a massive, massive airplane. And that was done out in Washington State, actually about 5 minutes by air from the little airstrip where I grew up, where my dad still lives. And that airplane, they flew, no problem. They flew that 2,000 miles from near Seattle out here to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, for our big get-together maybe two or 3 years ago. So people will do it.
Well, I guess if you own it, I mean, the urge to fly it is overwhelming. You say, might as well take it up.
Exactly. Go a couple thousand miles.
This was apparently Disney was in their plane buying mood when they did this. One of the other famous planes from this time, speaking of Howard Hughes and Terry O'Quinn, they had at the time, I think they still owned the Spruce Goose. They had moved it to Long Beach, and we were hoping for a great tourist attraction there with letting people see Howard Hughes's big, Hercules.
Right. Yeah, it was in that dome there, right next to the Queen Mary. So, yeah. Which is where I got married, as it happens. Oh, so
okay. Well, there. It's all about Hal show. So we're here.
Yeah. Now it's my turn, Jim. Okay. So, everybody gets a turn.
Yeah. So we. I couldn't figure out at the time why Disney bought it. I mean, other than they could own it and have it, but it just doesn't. It didn't really make sense for Disney to. I was thinking, are they going to try and get it to Anaheim or something? But
yeah, it was really interesting to set it up there and create what ultimately was an unsuccessful tourist attraction around it. I know we talk a little bit more about that airplane, the Hercules, in later episodes, but that always fascinated me. But then again, I find their current plans to open their Pandora world at Disney a little baffling.
Yeah, I mean it's we'll find out what happens there if Star Wars will overtake it and they'll just kind of expand. But we're back to the ground level now, and we're actually getting introduced to characters with the first lines of dialogue here, and we're getting Peavy and Cliff Secord, Cliff Secord being the pilot and Peavy being our mechanic, discussing how to fly a GB. And from what I'm understanding, he's pretty accurate as to as to how to fly this thing. This is basically you're in trouble for the moment the propeller starts turning, and you should panic as much as you can because panicking will help.
You know, and the airplanes have a pretty rough reputation. Basically, every single GB racer that was built did crash, and that's that's just one of those sort of facts of history. But you talk to people like Bill Turner, who built the one that the replica here that we see, and it was very, very faithful in terms of construction methods and handling, and was ultimately blessed by the Granville brothers themselves. 40 years later. So he built it in the 70s. This airplane from the 30s. Ultimately blessed by them, saying this is very accurate, very realistic. And those brothers were very frustrated by the reputation the airplanes had, because these airplanes really wasn't anything sort of poorly designed about them. It was just they're built to do one thing, and that's just to get in and go fast. And from the manufacturer's perspective, when they talk about the crashes, their feeling was really it was more about sort of pilot error than it would about anything structurally wrong with them or anything like that. Certainly they were meant, as I said, take off, go fast in a circle, and then if you can survive the landing, you're in good shape. Guys like Jimmy Doolittle survived flying them, but certainly a number of pilots didn't.
And Peavy mentions here at the opening. I mean, his first sentence is that it'll stall out at about 100. The planes that I've flown, the general aviation planes I've flown, usually when you're at about 65, they're okay. And just the idea that you have to go twice as fast just to keep it in the air. I guess there's just not a lot of surface area on that wing to hold up the giant engine, so you really have to keep plowing.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. I mean, it's not a long wing. There's a lot of density in the fuselage. It is sort of a lifting body fuselage, so at higher speeds, the idea anyway is that the fuselage has enough of an airfoil shape to it. It might carry a bit of its own weight, but the whole airplane is really, see, everything behind the engine is almost an afterthought. This thing exists to get that engine around pylons as fast as it can go. And when it's built to go fast like that, then generally speaking, you sacrifice those low speed handling techniques. So you're absolutely right. A stall speed of 100 would be very much a handful for pilots flying a lot of other airplanes of the day. And when you get into a current Cessna 172 or something like that, you can get that airplane down into the 40s before it'll stall. So very much an apples and oranges comparison there. But you're absolutely right. That makes this one of the things that makes this airplane a handful, particularly on landing.
Yeah, and we're seeing more as we get to this ground view. We're passing by Miss Los Angeles, and there's another monoplane behind it, which I think is that the mystery ship.
Yeah, that's another one of these wonderful reproductions of the Travel Air mystery ship, another contemporary racer. One of the more famous pilots to have flown that airplane was the original one from the 30s was Pancho Barnes. So you see her as the if you watch The Right Stuff, there's a grumpy old foul-mouthed woman tending bar, who also happened to be one of the great race pilots, one of the most colorful characters in aviation in the 30s. One of the most foul-mouthed people I think who's ever lived, but she had a mystery ship that she flew and raced quite a bit.
Nice to thinking that she would be a colleague of of Cliff and Peavy.
Exactly, I see her and Peavy grumbling about Cliff over a beer.
Yeah,
and then I see Peavy getting embarrassed by her language, frankly, and wandering away.
Yeah, or Millie chasing her out of the bulldog.
Right,
not in my place. But great scene. I think one of the things that is very well captured here with just the sight of the step ladder next to Miss Los Angeles is every time I go to a general aviation thing, it's a lot like going to a boat slip. There's maybe one ship taking off, and there's about 10 others where somebody either has a bucket full of soap and water or a paint, right, or they've got oil cans and all kinds of things. It's most of the time spent in owning an aircraft is sitting around either fixing it or cleaning it off or just trying to track down why so many bugs live in your plane.
Exactly. It's all about. I think you hit it. I'm glad you said washing and cleaning, because there's, that's a large part of it too. And I think sometimes that contributes to the reputation, is that, But hey, if you love your airplane, you want to go out there and keep it clean and tidy and everything else. And then of course too, all the airplanes we've seen so far on the ground at this airport are racers, which means we're always tuning and tweaking and everything else.
I think it captures. I mean, there is a main story in this, and we're going to talk about Nazi spy rings and all kinds of flying commandos and all that other jazz. But the background of it all, the whole environment, is general aviation, and all of the stuff here. This is 80 years ago. Nothing really has changed other than the tech, but it's all still the same. The camaraderie, the commiserating seems to be constant. That hasn't
Exactly.
changed in a century of aviation. This whole sense of you're fighting the air, and there's other people that are with you, and you try to get their ideas on how they're fighting the air.
Right. And even in the case of, something specifically and strictly competitive like racing, the camaraderie and cooperation there is, even to this day, is remarkable. You go to any small general aviation airport now, and you get a sense of that camaraderie. You walk around and find an open hangar and strike up a conversation and figure out who you know in common and all that good stuff. But as I said, even in the racing world, where there's prizes and other things at stake, you see some of the closest friendships, and everybody being willing to drop everything and help somebody else, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, it's as Joe Petroni said in another movie. It's like a circus that somebody yells, "Hey, Ruben!" Everybody comes running. It's quite
Right.
quite a friendship that develops over an entire planet of people doing these things. It's amazing. Great view of the hangar there, and the ever present airport beacon.
Right. And we may touch on this again in another episode, but in case we forget, that hangar still exists. The hangar was built for the film, and it's at the Santa Maria Airport, and it's home to their museum and a collection of some props from the film and stuff like that. So out in Santa Maria, California. So well worth a visit, and happy to give them a plug. I have hopes of maybe getting somebody from the museum on a future episode, but we'll see how that goes.
Tune in tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So we'll see. And we
Right. In fact, tune in 107 more times.
Piece of cake. You can do this, on your treadmill, out in the woods, wherever you want to start thinking about airplanes. We're right here.
While you're performing surgery, if that's something that you do.
Keep those hands steady, and if it starts to shimmy, just back. We also get to see not only aircraft, but there's a great Model T. Ford truck that's in this film, and we get to see a bit of it in this one little scene. That'll be Peavy's truck, which plays a major role later on. But it's nice getting a first view. People diss brown cars, but as I've owned several brown cars in my past, and I always kind of feel love for this poor little truck. We finally get to see a face-on view of Cliff and Peavy as they're walking around. As I'm watching this, the only thing that bothers me is that Cliff seems to make a very cursory pre-flight check of his plane. It's like, oh, there's a propeller. Okay, I better get in the plane.
Yeah, check. I always assumed that he had done the bulk of that, in the hangar before they rolled it out, but. That's just me trying to reconcile things. As Jim, as you said, anytime we fly an airplane. In fact, I'm actually flying. My wife and I are going to go fly to lunch after we're done recording this particular episode. You spend a good 20 minutes, half an hour, really looking over an airplane before you get in and go. It's you might say, "Oh, I'm going to jump in the airplane and go over here," but it's not quite the same as jumping in your car. We tend to take those pre-flight inspections much more seriously.
It's not like you can reach out the window and adjust your rear view. It's not
right, or pull over to the side of the road and stop because you forgot to close the trunk or something.
Yeah. There's not that many moving parts on the outside of a plane, but the ones that move, you have to make sure that they're free of Oh, this is Hornet season right now in the springtime here, and it's amazing how much they love the interior of aircraft and all the nooks and crannies.
Oh, sure.
But we are, So we watch him looking at things, and we passed by. By the way, we passed by a couple of names here: Ed Lauder and James Handy. I just want to focus a little bit on
Yes.
Ed Lauder. You will know this guy. He is a classic character actor. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he's been in everything as the. He's always the skeptical guy. He had a skeptical face that is that. The emoticon of a colon followed by a forward slash. He he was perfect at that. When you see his face and he look at somebody, he doesn't believe anybody. He was the perfect lead investigator, the desk sergeant, that kind of guy. And in this one, he plays an FBI agent. I love watching him on the and everything that he does. He is that guy. You don't know his name. You know his face in everything from Law and Order to Murder She Wrote and all the other mystery movies and all this other jazz. He had a great career. He was in over 200 movies and TV shows, and I just wanted to point him out because when we get to him a little bit in just a few episodes, we're gonna see a lot of him, and just again one of my favorite characters in this movie, and another good use of character actors in this film. Of course, the woman we have to thank for this, I didn't mention Timothy Dalton, but we'll talk about him in a later episode. But the woman that we have to thank for this is Nancy Foy, who was a casting director for this movie. She did a lot of Disney films, a lot of movies featuring kids, and so like the Honey I Shrunk the Kids kind of thing. She's done those kind of a lot of films featuring people of different ages. And really, she should have gotten an Oscar for this film because I think everybody in this movie is exactly who it's supposed to be. I've never seen a better cast movie that I can think of.
Now, is that unusual to see the casting director that far up front in the credits? I guess I can't say that I always pay attention to where casting directors fall, and of course we're kind of, there seems to be something cyclical on when we have opening credits versus just closing credits, and we seem to be very much in a strictly closing credits phase these days. But it always surprises me that Timothy Dalton and then boom, here's the casting director, which I think is great.
Actually, it goes lowest to highest, and what we're looking at. After we see what we're seeing, this is a DGA format. We see the cast. We've just seen all the major players listed. Those are the ones that have to be in the opening credits, and their contract specifies it. That's just a union rule of these are feature players. So from now on, as we go through the rest of these, this is we're going up the pyramid. So the lowest member on that totem pole is Nancy Foy, the casting director. So we're going to start seeing it go higher and higher as we're seeing. We take a break in the action here. We take a break in the cards as we get a little bit more storyline coming up. But she is she's the lowest member of the totem pole, and we're going to start going through things like makeup, set designer, production designer, who wrote the original one, the editor. And then we get through the producers, finally ending with the director. But that's minutes away. The director is the high guy on that totem pole. So here she's the biggest one of the tribe before we get to the chief and the medicine man and all that. So she's gotcha. The top of the NCOs.
Well, as you said, she couldn't possibly get enough credit for the casting in this film. It's just pitch perfect.
Yeah. So we get to watch her fade out on the back of. Here's another question I have as we go with pilots. Cliff is wearing his zipper jacket, and this is
right.
That to me is a normal. What would later become a members only jacket, but this is your standard. I don't see a white scarf. I think this is probably past the white scarf days, and you probably don't have. And he's in a closed cockpit, so he doesn't really need a white scarf.
Although
no,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just say, well, about the scarves, obviously to sort of keep your neck protected from the wind and things like that, but they also keep your neck from getting sort of chafed and rubbed raw as you're looking around so much. That's why we saw them so prevalent with the fighter pilots in World War One. So you have the nice silk around your neck as your head is literally on a swivel. You're always looking for the bad guy.
Hence the name Leathernecks. Yeah,
exactly.
And he's in this zip up leather jacket. It looks like a leather jacket. And he's wearing the high khakis. Later on, when we actually see the Rocketeer's get up, where he's got that across the top, and the button's kind of like an old dentist outfit. I was just wondering.
I never thought about that. I think you might have just ruined
Oh,
that jacket
sorry.
for me.
That's it. No jacket for you. So I was just
Yeah.
wondering that jacket as a. I have never seen it on anybody but the Rocketeer, and I was just trying to figure out is there any background to that in regular attire for aviators in the 30s?
I haven't. I don't think I've ever seen that sort of double-breasted or one and a half-breasted, whatever you describe
Yeah,
that
big
look
number 7 in brass
on.
buttons. Or
Yeah, exactly on other jackets there, but certainly um, in the barnstorming era, and here in the late 30s, we're at the very tail end of the barnstorming era, but pilots flying open cockpit biplanes around the country and landing in fields and selling rides and doing stunts and there things like Bigelow's circus, his aerial circus here, that sort of thing. They would. There was a style associated with it. It was almost always leather jackets. Leather that's tough, it's durable, it's light, protects you from the breeze. It's not necessarily too hot in the summer, but could be. But you saw people like really colorful characters in the air racing era around this same time, like Roscoe Turner, who wore much longer waisted jackets. And I think it really was just a stylistic thing that, okay, everybody's got their leather jacket, but who can make theirs look a little bit fancier as part of their image and, or prototypical branding at that time.
I do have a question at second 43. I was trying to figure out
Okay.
how chronologically correct that is. There seems to be a plastic barrel holding up the bottom of the GB.
Let's see here. I'm looking right at second 43 right now.
43, yeah.
Holding at the bottom of the
Yeah,
GB?
underneath the GB, there seems to be a clear plastic barrel, and it's right in front of. It's kind of a chock in front of the tail wheel, and it just does. It doesn't seem to be.
Ah. Oh, no, you know what that is. Sorry, I was starting. I was starting later in second
It's the
43.
canopy.
It's
It's
the
the canopy.
canopy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the canopy that's just in kind of an odd spot to just set
Yeah.
it. But yeah, we see that much more clearly right at the end of this minute when Cliff gets in and they sort of bolt him
Got it.
into
I
it.
was I was wondering what that. It looked like a chalk to me, but now that I'm looking at, yeah, that's the lid, and it's just taking the
Yeah,
reflection, the yellow reflection. It just looked like a. Okay. Now that begins to
yeah.
make sense because I'd been watching this the other day, and I was like, what is that? And then
And you thought Joe Johnston
I
made a
thought, yeah,
mistake, Jim. Come on, you know
yeah,
better
I'm
than
I'm
that.
all- I'm all in tune with it now. So
Yeah, right in that second 43, we see Cliff's walking around the back of the airplane. He's just about to pull out his gum, his Beeman's chewing gum, of course. But you get a nice look at the rudder of the GB, so it's got that N number again, an R77 Victor, and then the nice script manufactured by Granville Brothers Aircraft, Springfield Airport, Springfield, Massachusetts. So at the original GBZ, the original 77 Victor, was known as the city of Springfield. And that was the nose art. That was the name it was named to honor their hometown. And so that's a little bit of foreshadowing because we may or may not see another airplane with that title on it later on.
okay. Now the Granville brothers, they were primarily concerned with racing, but did they sell other types of aircraft, or that was their specific focus?
They they specialized in racing. They were really really focused on that. And again, I think we'll probably go talk about this further, but they were prolific race plane designers, but that was their laser focus. And it's a shame that so few of their airplanes really survive today. Anything you see is almost certainly a replica. There's one complete GB QED. That's that really giant version we talked about when I talked about a replica flying here from Seattle. That one's in a museum in Mexico City. The next biggest piece is from a Model R racer, and it's a portion of a wing, and we've got that in our museum here in Oshkosh. And otherwise, there's really nothing out there that's real. The replica we see here on screen is currently on display at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. So that's a cool thing to go out and see. And then there's sort of a sister ship, another GBZ replica that belongs to Kermit Weeks out in Florida. And we've been talking to Kermit about coming on as a guest, so we'll hopefully have him in a future episode.
Sounds really good. Now, Beeman's, I was wondering. I know that it's considered a classic of aviators, but the only way I know this is that I've seen it in this movie and I've seen it in The Right Stuff.
In the right stuff. And beyond that, that's going to be a fun one to see if we can dig into further. I've never really understood the connection, other than it's just one of those things that everybody seems to know. Obviously the Right Stuff and the Rocketeer reinforced it, and it does periodically get re-released. We have to see if there's anybody selling it currently, so we can get it up on the site.
Yeah, usually I check Cracker Barrel seems to be the major supplier of Beeman's gum.
Oh, right.
So I'll check in and see.
And if you haven't tried it, it's I'm not a huge gum chewer, but it's really good. It's a strong wintergreen
Yeah, it tastes
flavor.
like those old candy cigarettes. That was the closest flavor I can think of.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, very much like the candy cigarettes, and a little bit of Lifesaver, wintergreen Lifesaver. Sorry, Green
Yeah.
Lifesaver.
I don't know if they have that piezoelectric effect of regular lifesavers, but
Right. I don't know if you can go sparking with Beemans, but we'll talk about that on a future episode of the Candy Minute.
it's
I'm
coming
sure.
up, don't worry.
The
I
confectionery
do
minute.
notice the windsock is like fully pointing to the left, which seems like quite a crosswind to be taking off on your first flight.
Well, I think where he's sitting here, though, I'll have to watch this to be sure. It's I believe right now he's basically parallel to the runway, isn't he?
Yeah, he is parallel. So if anything, it would know.
So where he's sitting right now, it's a strong tailwind. But as soon as he turns around, because he taxiing off left frame, so he'll be going straight into the wind. Which, as long as the wind is consistent, and especially in something of a swirlier airplane like this, hopefully right down the runway, it's not much of an issue. Now, if he were taking off and then trying to fly somewhere and get to another location in a hurry, then a headwind is going to slow you down and a tailwind will speed you up. But for takeoff and landing, going right off into the wind, not a huge worry. But boy, if I were going to go get checked out in something like a GB, I would want a nice calm day.
I do notice that on the as they're installing the canopy, in beautiful script is the words Air Racing Association. Is the ARA still around, or is that a
I can't tell you off the top of my head if there's a direct lineage between the ARA in this era and then what we have now with what we call RARA, the Reno Air Racing Association out in Reno, Nevada. If there's not a direct connection, sort of from a maybe a corporate structure standpoint, there's certainly the spiritual descendants of groups like the Air Racing Association here back in the 30s.
And were they responsible for the Bendix Cup, or was that a different group that had?
Well, so you had the Cleveland National Air Races, and I know a couple times we hear Peavy. He talks about the Nationals. I believe he mentions Cleveland even at least once. And then what you had was the Bendix race was either Burbank or Los Angeles to Cleveland, basically to get to the races. So you have the long distance cross country race to get there. Then you have all the events that happen there. So what you had was, as I understand, like something like this Air Racing Association would have managed the Cleveland races, and then you had companies like Bendix Corporation coming up and sponsoring and saying, well, what if we raced on the way to the races, and we call it the Bendix race? It's part of the National Air Races, but they get the named sponsorship and things like that. So you found, and there were several different trophies, different cups, races within the overall event.
Similar to like the way Winston Cup is part of general NASCAR racing and things like that. So.
Sure. One other thing quickly to point out, I've been up close to this airplane we see on screen in here, and then I did sit in its sister ship, and probably the most incredible stunt that Bill Campbell performs in this whole movie is walking up to this airplane and then swinging a leg up and climbing in from there, getting that leg up. It's almost to his head, and he's able to just hop right in. Granted, I was, older, I'm twice his age now. I was probably a lot older than he was first time I sat in one, and I'm a much bigger guy. But, I had a little step stool and, a guy to give me a hand and stepping in gingerly and not wanting to do anything. The way I don't know if he had to practice that or not. I would love to ask him, but he just walks up and he does this rocket high kick, and then suddenly he's climbing into the airplane.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a hidden step ladder that we've missed, or if they're up on a ramp somewhere, but if we ever do get him on, and unfortunately for us, Bill Campbell is very popular right now. He's on a Canadian detective show, and he doesn't have time for mere mortals.
Curse him and his success.
Darn his rise to fame. But anyway, if we can get
Right.
him on, and who knows, keep tuning in. We've got only about 10 decades more of episodes, but somewhere in here, maybe we'll get a Bill
Right.
Campbell minute.
And very quickly before we wrap up, the very last frame of this minute, as they're just about to put the canopy on, we'll talk about that canopy tomorrow. But Cliff has this young, sort of earnest, kind of optimistic look on. He's getting that last bit of advice from Peavy. It's a perfect frame. You get a good look at that helmet, those classic goggles. He's something about that whole look is just flawless. I occasionally fly open cockpit airplanes. I've got helmet and goggles like that. We still use them today, very much the same. Although mine have a Bose headset wound into them, so they don't have that super clean, that super clean look. But you could just take that last frame of this minute, and it's just portrait of a classic aviator.
Yeah. It's the very striking profile there, and gosh, well, I mean, I would assume that there's somebody that still makes leather helmets like that. The coveralls that you can pull down.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. In fact, when I had mine custom done, and I'm thinking about going back and actually getting one without the headset cups in it, and maybe just using like little inner ear buds or something like that, just because you have to love that look so much. That nice clean, that clean
Yeah,
look. But they make all the difference in an open cockpit airplane.
yeah, definitely. And just from, I'm assuming that it's a lot like riding in a motorcycle without a helmet, and you're just kind of sweeping the bees out of your hair when you get out of the thing, or probably wiping the oil off your face too. Probably
Right.
not a
Yeah, like a motorcycle, but at least in some cases faster. And so the impact of the bugs is accelerated.
I wonder how many kids seeing this movie wound up in getting involved in aviation, because I would think that if I were a 10-year-old at the time watching this, the first thing you'd want to do is go track down your local air school and get a license or something, because it is one of the best movies for general aviation that I've seen out there, that you say I want to get in a plane now.
Absolutely. And I generally don't want to turn this into any kind of a plug, but I hadn't really thought about this. But the year after this movie came out, 1992, EAA, where I work, we started a program called the Young Eagles Program. And that was, we just decided that we're going to give any kid between the ages of 8 and 17 a free introductory airplane ride. If you're a kid and you think airplanes are cool for whatever reason, we're going to make sure to get you up in a small airplane for free. And we had this commitment that by 2003, the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers, we'd try to fly 1 million kids. And nobody was really convinced we could do it, but I think by 2003, we'd hit 1.2 million. Then this last summer, we actually passed the 2 million mark. So,
well, I can, as the father of an 8-year-old at the time, or no, he was 9 years old at the time. I can vouch for the fact that the Young Eagles were great. My son went up in a Mooney when he was 8. He'd been on a lot of commercial planes, but just getting in there and taking up into the sky in a general aviation plane, thanks to the kindness of the owner of the Mooney, he really it put the hook in him, and he went and he soloed when he was 16, and
that's great to hear.
Went on
that's
into gliding and things like that. So it's that love of aviation starts at an early age, and I think the more you get experiences with it, personal experiences, I think the more it drives you to say, I can do this. This is not an impossible dream for me.
Right. Just maybe don't start in a GB.
Yeah.
Work your way up.
Hang on, kid.
Yeah, exactly. You pull back to go up. Any questions? Have fun.
And if she starts to shimmy,
yeah, exactly. Don't forget your gum.
Handful. Yeah. So anyway, a great second minute to this film. I know that we have to do this because it has to end eventually, and I know we're here at the beginning, but these minutes go by very rapidly. But it's great having all of our wonderful listeners with us to join us in this journey. You can join us out there in the social universe, the social media universe. At Twitter, we're available at Rocketeer Minute. and you can talk back with us right away. We also have we have a presence on Facebook in the Rocketeer's Bulldog Cafe, where everybody gets together and chats about how much they love this movie and all the people in the movie and what they want to do and what they never want to see in a sequel and all that kind of stuff. We can talk about that there. Join us also at our great big website, rocketeerminute.com. You can catch up on all of our previous episode at this point. Go back and listen to episode 1 if you missed it, because that was a really good one. And all our future episodes will be out there. Also, you can get some really cool swag from Amazon and who knows what. It's all out there in the shopping section of Rocketeer Minute. If you're liking this show so far this week, go out to iTunes or Google Play, search for Rocketeer Minute, and we are out there. Subscribe and have this delivered to your mobile device every morning, promptly, so you can get on your treadmill and say, "Gee, I wonder what they're going to talk about today." So you can answer that question for yourself tomorrow. But join us here Wednesday when we talk a little bit more about the GB and a little bit more about flying in general. And who knows where we will wind up diverging to, as is our one. But join us here tomorrow on the Rocketeer Minute. Until then, over and out.
Go get him, kid.